Other poll, our preseason top 25.
It's the Sports Nightly preseason top 25 tonight.
Down the 31-yard line, first down. Nick straight back. He's going to the end zone for Seth Williams. Did he catch it? He did! Touchdown Auburn! 32 yards! My goodness, what a catch by Seth Williams!
Number 14, the Auburn Tigers.
And here to talk to us about the Tigers, the play-by-play voice of Auburn, Andy Burcham. And let's start with some changes on that staff for Gus Malzahn, new offensive coordinator, new offensive line coach, among other things. Take me through that process of making some of those changes in the offseason for the Tigers.
Well, one of the things that Gus Malzahn likes to talk about is the continuity that he has on his staff. And although he has 3 new coaches on the staff, he likes the fact that the rest of the guys are back. But the 3 new guys that he has, one on defense is Al Pogue, who was with Auburn back in 2010 when Gus Malzahn was the offensive coordinator and Auburn won the national championship. And then 2 new guys on offense, Jack Bicknell Jr., who comes to Auburn from Ole Miss as the offensive line coach. And then Chad Morris comes to Auburn after his time as the head coach at Arkansas, formerly the head coach at SMU, offensive coordinator at Clemson. And Gus and Chad have a relationship that extends back to when they were high school coaches. Chad down in Texas and Gus, of course, in Arkansas. That's when they met, and they have a pretty close relationship. They're friends, a very good working relationship, so much so that Gus Malzahn has turned the offense over to Chad Morris, and he's never done that since the time that he has been a head coach at Auburn. There have been times where he's let his offensive coordinator call the plays, but it really has gone a step beyond that with Chad Morris kind of putting that offensive game plan together and calling plays. But let's be honest, it's still a Gus Malzahn offense. But he has released as much power on that offense to Chad Morris, more so than he's ever done with any of his offensive coordinators prior.
Well, that's interesting. It also shows you how tight-knit that coaching fraternity is and how far back some of these guys go with each other. Andy, how big a job does Coach Bicknell have with that offensive line for 2020?
Well, it's one of the toughest jobs that any coach has on the Auburn staff, simply because Auburn returns just one starter from an offensive line from a year ago, and that's Nick Brahms at center. Add to that fact that Auburn did not have a spring practice to kind of put that offensive line together. So whenever this practice begins, we learn the schedule and we learn of the new practice schedule, I've got to think that the first thing that Auburn has to do is get that offensive line together, get it as cohesive as it can for what's expected to be the SEC and, as far as Auburn is concerned, the season debut on September 26th. But to me, that without question, whether it's a new coach there or not, the biggest question mark on this team is an offensive line for Auburn this season.
Yeah, that's what it's like to me. Again, busy with Andy Burcham, the play-by-play voice of the Auburn Tigers. We have Auburn at number 14 in our preseason top 25. Andy, we really enjoyed watching Bo Nix play last year. What a special athlete, player in that program. Talk to me about him as a young man and a little bit about some of the weapons he'll have around him here this fall.
Like his father, Patrick, who was a quarterback for Auburn in the early 90s, he is a leader on this football team. And he did a great job, I thought, leading an offense as a true freshman a year ago. And there were times where he looked like a true freshman. And think about it, a true freshman at a Power 5 school in a conference as tough as the SEC, that's a tough job to have. But it's one that he embraced. It's one that he stepped up to and was the SEC Freshman of the Year. And now he has to take the next step. He cannot sit back and rest on the laurels of what was a very good freshman season, a record-breaking freshman season at Auburn. But he has to become more consistent. He can't have those off games that he had a year ago. Now, his game against Alabama was terrific, maybe the best game that he had all season long. No turnovers, led that offense that day to a big victory against Auburn's arch rival. But he has to be a consistent quarterback. He has a new quarterback coach in Chad Morris. I don't think you can say it's a new offense because it's still Gus Malzahn's offense, although Chad Morris will be leading it. But he also deals with the fact that all those guys up front, other than Nick Brahms, his center, will be new on that offensive line. That's the part that is the biggest concern. Now, his skill positions at wide receiver, this is as good a wide receiving core as Auburn has had in a number of years, and Auburn will be very strong in the backfield with Bo Nix. And I think we'll see Auburn use the tight end more as an offensive weapon, more so than just a blocking back that we've seen in the last couple of years. So that's what Bo Nix has. In talking with Gus Malzahn, when you ask about the leadership on this team, and Gus is just like many other coaches out there. I mean, leadership is very, very important, and the first guy that he talks about as a leader on that offense is a true sophomore, who is Bo Nix, his starting quarterback going into the 2020 season.
Andy, let's flip to defense. Kevin Steele, certainly a familiar name for Husker fans, runs that defense. It's traditionally a top 30 type defense. Enough guys back and enough talent there to continue that trend, do you think?
Yeah, a year ago, Auburn's strength was its defensive line. And two of those guys are now going to be playing on Sundays, in Derek Brown, who was a first-round draft pick, and Marlon Davidson, who was a second-round draft pick. And then Auburn had a very, very strong secondary a year ago and had another first-round draft pick back there in Noah Igbenogany, who was a former wide receiver that had moved to cornerback and was drafted in the first round of the draft this past spring. So Auburn has a lot to replace on the defense. A year ago, though, Auburn's biggest question mark defensively was at linebacker. It was young. It was inexperienced. Oddly enough, going into the 2020 season, without question, the strength is that linebacking core, led by K.J. Britt, who was an all-SEC performer a year ago, Owen Papo, who was terrific as a freshman, Chandler Wooten, Zacoby McClain are guys that return at that linebacking core. And while Auburn has to replace a guy like a Derek Brown and a Marlon Davidson up front, it's not like the guys that played a year ago didn't get a lot of playing time. Rodney Garner, who's Auburn's defensive line coach, and I think one of the very best in the country, under Kevin Steele, who's the defensive coordinator. Rodney Garner uses a lot of guys on that defensive front. They play a lot. He uses a lot of depth, and he has a lot of depth coming back. It's just you've got to replace some marquee guys. Also, Auburn has to do some work in the secondary as well with regard to its secondary. So there are some holes to be filled, but they like the talent that they have. It's just, when do they get out there and practice and start developing that a little bit more? And that's a question that we just don't have answered at this point.
Andy, how anxious are the fans to just get their hands on that schedule and see what that 10-game schedule is going to look like?
Well, as anxious as I am, because I want to know what that schedule looks like right now. It was going to be a tough conference season for Auburn, because Auburn plays in the Western Division of the Southeastern Conference, and that includes the defending national champion LSU, and then a team like Alabama that many are picking to contend for the national championship this year. And then you've got up-and-coming programs like Ole Miss and Mississippi State with brand-new coaching staffs, Texas A&M as well, and Arkansas will have a brand-new head coach. So, and then you get Georgia, and Georgia is always Auburn's Eastern Division foe. Now, who are the other teams that Auburn will face? We don't know at this point who those two teams from the Eastern Division that Auburn will face. But I think as anxious as fans are to see what that schedule is like, fans are also anxious to see what it's going to be like as far as how many folks can come to Jordan-Hare Stadium, and where will they be sitting at Jordan-Hare Stadium this year. There's a great deal of uncertainty here. I'm sure there's a great deal of uncertainty there in Lincoln as well, as all of these questions that are still up in the air at this point.
A lot more questions than answers, that's for sure. Well, Andy, we appreciate you supplying some answers about Auburn with us. Hopefully you're calling some football here by the end of September.
Well, I can't wait. I certainly look forward to that.